Hi, welcome back to Tax Sale Insiders. Again, I am Rachel Seidensticker, the COO of Tax Sale Resources, and this is my brother, Brian Seidensticker, and he is the CEO. And we've been coming back here week to week with different topics to interview Brian about concerning what we feel like you probably deem important as a tax sale investor, and hopefully bring you some knowledge that both of us have learned over the last 12 plus years in this industry. We are by no means experts. We've just gleaned a lot of information through experts in the industry, as well as working with fellow investors in the space. So that's why we're here. I always like to do a little bit of a disclaimer. We're not attorneys and we're not a title company, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, Brian, welcome. Thanks for coming back.
Oh, thank you for having me again. Hi, everybody.
Hopefully people don't get sick of listening to us talk, but we're here. We're putting you through it. Well, anyway, so today we're going to try to clear up some confusion in this space called titling and for tax sale properties. It is not a cut and dried process as it is in most traditional real estate transactions, and that is what we're staying focused on, is tax sale specific, and maybe some nuances. And I started this before all of you are joining us, and told Brian, let's try to keep this a short interview.
I was gonna say, how much time we got? This is you're opening Pandora's box when you start talking about title issues.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, a lot to share. So we're gonna keep it short, and I'm sure Brian will say it a few times. For more information, find an industry professional that deals in title. But let's talk about this. Let's start with sharing some general ways that taking title on tax sale properties is different than your traditional real estate.
Yeah, well, and I'll reiterate that disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I'm not a title attorney. We're not a title company. And in reality, we're going to give you a very high level overview, but each state is very different. And so again, talk to an attorney that's familiar with tax sales in the state that you're looking to get into. For detailed questions. At least we can help point people in the right direction. But I think probably the biggest difference is people don't even think about title insurance or title, like what does that even mean with traditional real estate? Because it's all done, or it's just done, say automatically, kind of in the background. I go to the title company and I sign a bunch of documents, but most people don't even know what those documents are or why you're doing it that way. But in reality, what the title company is doing is research on the ownership history of that property, and basically issuing insurance at the closing table saying you are now rightful owner of this property. Right? No one else can lay claim to this property. But if they do, right, I will rectify the situation. That's what insurance is intended to be. That's what title insurance is. And that's done on every transaction, traditional transaction real estate. Just most people aren't aware that all goes, that happens, right? It's just an expense on their HUD statement or the closing statement. So that's traditional real estate. And tax deeds, right? It's a whole different story. If you're not thinking about this, you're going to be burned about it or by it in some way, shape, or form somewhere along the line. And you need to learn how to understand, how to do a title search, how to interpret a title search, right? What things mean, what those risks are, right? All of that stuff is very apparent with tax deeds because you don't get title insurance in almost all cases. There's exceptions as always, but you do not get title insurance when you purchase that property, from the county or the municipality or whoever's hosting that auction. So that's the biggest, I'll say, difference, is the fact that you even got to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, that's a valid point. And you take us, I guess, naturally into now you have to think about it. So what are some high level issues that would be prominent for tax sale title, or to get title for a tax sale property, the specific issues?
Well, how do we narrow it down? Well, I think the main components are understanding how much time we got again? 20 minutes?
Yeah, I know.
I'll open up, like you say, this topic of due process, but understanding what that is. And it's basically ensuring that everybody who previously had ownership in this property was notified correctly, had enough time to do something about it, right? That is what due process is. And that's actually, it's I guess, in the Constitution, right? So it's not even a state law. It's something that is required. It's a right of all citizens to be able to get due process as part of the foreclosure process. That's number one, right? So, and there are many sales that occur where due process doesn't, I'll say, good enough, or the process that the county takes is not good enough in order to check those boxes, right? And that's where having to go through a quiet title process or have to go through title certification is basically saying, okay, I didn't get it from the county, but this other attorney or title company is going to do that for me, and so I can get title insurance at the end of the day. That's number one. The other thing in order is really just the other, I'll say, items or liens that you might inherit. Right. And there are certain things that might get, I'll say, wiped out or cleaned up as part of the foreclosure process if it's done correctly. But I can also tell you, even in states where that stuff typically gets wiped out, if the mortgage is not called out as part of that foreclosure process in Florida, which is a very common state, if a mortgage company is not called out in the noticing, technically you bought a tax deed and you're still beholden to that mortgage, right? So it's understanding like all the other things that can come along with it, because you didn't have a title company that sat there and analyzed it all for you and said, yep, we're good, we're going to sign off and we're going to issue insurance. Because if you did, right, and that previous mortgage comes out, the title company says, and the title insurance says, okay, we'll pay them off and you're still made whole. That's kind of the two components that, from a due process and a, I'll say, title or lien scenario that we're talking about when we say title.
I like it. Yeah. Hey, bravo. Honestly, you wrapped it up.
That only took like 5 minutes.
I know.
Hours of conversation with attorneys.
On those two topics alone, right? But,
yeah.
I think my quick question to you would be, if someone, coming into this could compare it to anything, what I am hearing is titling for tax sale properties is kind of similar as far as steps you have to take, due process being the big one, as going through the mortgage foreclosure process, which is going to be different than just a traditional realtor exchange for a property. Is that a safe statement, or shouldn't go?
No, I mean, I'll admit my knowledge of foreclosures and nationwide in every state is I'll say limited, right? But from my understanding, typically the mortgage foreclosure is done in such a way that you still get insurable title at the end of that foreclosure, right? So there's really no comparison between tax deeds and traditional foreclosures from a title perspective.
Okay.
Foreclosures, you do get title insurance. Tax deeds, in most cases, you do not.
Okay. All right. Well, you mentioned this, and it's, again, I think a great thing to talk about would be finding out some of those things, like those liens that need to be, what's coming with the property, which, is solved in a title search. So what are the different types of title searches? Let's start there versus how to do one. Like, what are the different types of title searches, or is there a difference?
Well, I would say title companies can give names for how in depth they go, but from my I'll say knowledge, right, and experiences, every title company has a slightly different definition of that. There's not like this is this is that, right? There's I'll say the owner and encumbrance report, which is like, hey, here's what we know, with a quick look at title. Then you can get into like the 5, 10, 15, 30-year title search, 3 owner search, whatever you want to call it. It's just going how far back in the history of that property are they looking, right? So how far deep do you need to go? And now that is one aspect of looking at title, but the other aspect, which I bucket it with title, but there's municipal liens, and there's other things that don't necessarily show up on a title search because they're not recorded, with a title, with the county against the title, but there are fines due from that property, right, due to not mowing your lawn, that unless you do what's called a municipal lien search, right, you wouldn't find those things either. But I put all of that in one bucket. And really what it comes down to is what are the things that you need to look at or be worried about, and do you see them in all of your research, through title, through municipal lien, right? Or if you've hired a title company to do the search, right, they usually have a summary. What are the things that you need to look at? But those are the, I guess, things that you should look at. That doesn't answer the question of what the different types of title searches are, because there's basically different names from each title company.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, are there specific? We'll move on. Let's talk about, because it sounds like that could get pretty deep. How about conducting a title search? How could investors, especially those new on the scene, how do they go about conducting a title search, and what can they really expect then? It sounds like you mentioned municipal liens not being on a title search. So what would be on a title search that would handle, does it handle most of the things that they need to be worried about, or what's going on there?
Well, the title search is basically searching the history of documents recorded, against that property, that have been, again, recorded with the county, right? So that is what a title search should bring up, right? Things like if somebody recorded a mortgage on that property, if somebody recorded a mechanics lien on that property, if somebody recorded any other kind of lien on that, or a tax lien on that property, right? That those things should be recorded documents, right? There's the other aspect of a title search, which is the ownership history, right? Who owns the property now? Who owned it before them? How did they get ownership of that property? That all kind of ties into the status of the title, right? And then there's things that you don't get through the recorder, which is the municipal lien, typically municipal liens and other, let's say city or county departments. If it's not recorded, it's not going to show up on the title search. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It's just not going to show up on a title search. But the recorded documents and the ownership history is what the title search is going to tell you, which are two very key components you need to be looking at for sure.
Okay. It's a good start. So that's what you can get. How do you go about doing that? Just through a title company of some nature, or what?
That's an option, right?
Okay.
It all starts with the county recorder, right, or whatever the state calls the county recorder's office, right? It's just all the documents that the county holds, right? And searching that, right? And that searching is being more and more available online. You go 20 years ago, it was still very, I'll say manual, meaning you literally went down to the county courthouse, you sifted through documents, you pulled it, right? That's, abstractor is what they called that job. There are people that literally do that all day long. And they're pulling documents, and it came down to how good is that abstractor in pulling those documents? Are they going to find everything, right? And so today, with stuff being online, right, as long as the information in that recorded document has been, I'll say, digitized correctly, meaning the parcel number was transcribed correctly, and when you search for the parcel number in the county's recorder's website, does it pull the applicable documents, right? You can do it yourself, right? But then you get all of these. I'll tell you what, I am not an expert, and I can stare at those documents and go, oh, this looks nice, but what the heck is this telling me, right? And that's where the second part of it is understanding what you're looking at and understanding how, what are issues and what are not, right? You definitely don't get that, just looking at the documents. The documents are just a bunch of recorded information, right? And like with a mortgage, there's usually a recorded mortgage and a release of that mortgage, right? Do you find both, right? And that's where hiring a title company to do that title search does come in very handy, because they also provide that summary, right? Here's what we found, right? They did some of that interpretation for you. But again, that doesn't tell you all of the things you need to be worried about, right? Because they might say, here's a common, I don't know, mistake's the right word, but the title company is going to say current owners of the property are John Smith, Beth Smith, Joe Smith, Bob Smith, Donna Smith, whatever, right? And they list out all these owners, right? They're not going to say that's an issue, but if you're the investor and you're looking at that going, holy crap, there's 20 owners on this thing. Why is that? And then that should also trigger the thought of, were all of those people actually notified in this foreclosure? Right? That's where that risk starts to come in, that the title search isn't necessarily going to tell you right? Unless you know to look for those sorts of things, because all it takes is one of those people being missed in that foreclosure notification process. Technically, they still have ownership of that property, and they can fight you on it if they want to, right? That's where the quiet title comes in. So anyway, like you said, this is a very deep topic, and we can go way down a rabbit hole. And I'm not even qualified to really go down those rabbit holes like a title attorney or a title company can, but certainly understand it enough to say, here's some things that you as the investor should be aware of. And do you need to learn how to do all that stuff yourself? Personally, I don't think you could or should, right? Unless you happen to be a title abstractor or a title company or title attorney, right? Then you've got all that knowledge. Otherwise, you figure out what the issues are from an attorney. Maybe they can guide you in the things that you should look for in that state. And then can you do some of that work yourself? Probably. But are you going to be an expert like that in every state? No way. I don't see that happening.
Gotcha. Well, and you mentioned risks, title dangers, I guess. And one of those is understanding if there's multiple owners. I squeezed in the word or the phrase et al. That's always a red flag. Et al. I know is a red flag when you see that as ownership on a property. Yeah,
I guess in our, referencing our data, right, as you get it, in the research platform and you look at the current owner and it says, back to John Smith et al. Et al. Basically means there's a boatload of other people that can't fit them all in that one little, so that's everyone else. So that is should be a flag to maybe look into that a little more, for sure.
Yeah. How about, are there any other mitigation efforts for issues that people can kind of keep in mind when they're trying to think about title on tax sale properties?
It's hard to generalize it, because in reality, even if you, because it comes down to two things: looking at the title search, but also looking at the foreclosure file, right? And this is where, the title, I'll say that back to the et al. Experience, example, right? There might be 6 owners, right? And it says et al. I can't tell you, okay, that eliminates that, right, property from being, beneficial, right? If the foreclosure is done correctly and all 6 of those owners were notified correctly in that foreclosure file, that's not an issue, right? That's not a risk, right? And that's where, hiring a third party, to do some of that is definitely beneficial. There are title certification companies that they do all of that, and then the nice thing is they're giving you that feedback, and then they're also able to probably get title insurance in most cases, right? Or tell you, here's the things that need to be done in order to get title insurance. So they go that next step further. Now that comes with a cost, right? But is that, it all comes down to, is the risk worth that cost? And I can tell you, spending a few $100s on a title search versus a multi $10,000 quiet title lawsuit to fix issues that weren't fixed correctly by the county foreclosure, it starts to make sense pretty quickly.
I guess we go into then how could we get a title search? How could investors get a title search fairly easily? What are some options?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can gain access to the recorder's website, right, and try to do it yourself. Not necessarily what I'd recommend, but there's a lot of people that are doing it that way. And I think here's my take on that is, you'll do it okay, right? You're still probably going to get caught by something you didn't have the expertise in finding. So why didn't you just hire an expert at the beginning? That's my take on it. But people can certainly do it themselves. You can certainly go to a title company or title attorney and pay them to do it. You can actually buy a title search, through our platform as well, which is basically a First American product where a title abstractor has done, I'll say, the hard work, and they've done a quick summary, right? But it's also it's not going to tell you this is perfect, right? That's not what it's doing. It's basically just pulling the documents, giving you a summary, and you still have to interpret that. That's the next step would be, okay, you can hire a title attorney to do the search and the analysis, right? That's, I'd say, the extreme level. But if you are, and this is where it comes down to, okay, if you're buying a vacant lot for $1,000, right? Is it worth paying $400, in a title search versus doing it yourself? Maybe do it yourself, and that, because the risk, versus expense. Okay, I'm out $1,000. depending on your situation, is that the end of the world? Probably not. Versus, hey, I'm looking at spending $800,000 on this property at an auction. I'm definitely going to hire an attorney to tell me all of the potential issues, because that risk is immensely higher than $1,000 vacant lot. So there's a happy medium. There's not a perfect solution that I'd recommend everybody do in every situation.
Okay. So switching gears, I guess, ever so slightly, in talking about quiet title specifically, what is quiet title? What is that process? And how does it differ from like this kind of normal titling process? If there's specific differences with tax delinquencies that we're talking about here, are there any?
Yeah, I'd say that probably maybe a big misconception is the fact that quiet title has any resemblance to a standard title, I'll say process. They're not the same at all. A quiet title is actually a lawsuit. It's just called a quiet title. And really what it's doing is plugging the holes typically in due process that the regular county foreclosure doesn't, right? So it's basically, all right, what happens, right? If you want to get to the bare bones, is the people that ultimately decide what needs to be done are the title insurers, the underwriters that issue the title insurance. They are the ones that write the requirements of what needs to be done. Now, they're smart, very smart people. So they do their homework. They understand tax deeds. They understand the risks, and they will basically say, okay, well, in this state, the county's process doesn't really fulfill the full due process requirements, that are required by the Constitution. So in that state, we're going to require that a quiet title done. And basically what the quiet title is doing is doing the foreclosure again, right? Notifying everybody, so to ensure that due process is done. And the title insurance company will say, okay, if quiet title is completed in that state, then we can issue title insurance on that property, right? So quiet title is just a way of plugging those gaps that are needed. It does not eliminate municipal liens. It does not eliminate HOA fines, right? That's another misconception. That's not clearing the title. It's making the title insurable, right? Okay. Now there's a services called title certification that do a similar thing like a quiet title. And basically what those folks have done is the underwriter, the title insurer has said, okay, you have two options in that state, right? The foreclosure that's done by the county is not good enough, for due process. So it's not good enough for us. We're not going to issue title insurance on that, but you can either go through quiet title, or if you do a title certification through this group or these specific groups, because we have faith in their process. We have faith in it's not technically a lawsuit filed like a quiet title, but the end result is very similar, right? And says you can get title insurance if you go through that title certification process.
Okay. All right. Interesting. I learned something in that one. So thank you.
We all learn something once a day, right?
Yeah, right. Just once a day. Are there some states that are more difficult to obtain quiet title, or is that just pretty much the same across all states?
No, I mean, there are certainly nuances. States that are harder. It really comes down to how long does it take, right? And I'll say the easy states, like Florida, is if you're going to do a quiet title or required to do a quiet title, it could be a couple months, right? And then there's states where, the process that's required as part of that quiet title, it could be a minimum of a 9-month process. So, because technically in the end, the quiet title requirements are governed by state statute, as far as you need to notify these people, you need to give them 30 days notice, and then you need to do this, and then you need to do this, right? That's governed by state statute, and that's why it varies, each state.
Okay. Gotcha. I think, for the most part, that are there, here are some frequently asked questions, I guess, to kind of think about. Can you resell a tax deed before getting the quiet title?
You can, but you can't with title insurance, right? You can sell a quick claim deed. Now, I can tell you more and more title companies are starting to not even transact quick claim deeds. So even though legally you can, getting a title company to do that transaction is getting harder and harder. And basically what does a quick claim deed mean? It means basically saying, here's the property, you're inheriting all the same garbage I had, right? And so you better make sure whoever's buying that understands what they're doing, what they're buying. right? You can say, "Oh, it was buyer beware," but we live in a litigious society. Anybody can sue anyone for anything, and just because your agreement said, "Hey, I am selling this on a quick claim deed," doesn't mean that they won't come back and say, "Oh, you lied to me. I didn't know what I was buying, and so I want my money back." Right? So I don't recommend doing that unless you know that the buyer is knowledgeable and understands what they're purchasing. In that situation.
Okay. And how much does quiet title compared to going through a full titling process? Do you have a general idea of cost on these types of things? Like a title search? What's all that cost?
Yeah, I guess to ensure a quiet title does not, you have to go through a title company, to close no matter what, right?
Okay.
It's more of what are the other things I need to do in addition to that, right? A quiet title, again, varies by state. I think today, I'd say an average is, let's say, $3,500 to $4,000 a property, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's if there are no issues along the way. That can quickly balloon if they run into issues, and that now becomes a $30,000 quiet title suit, right? You're paying by the hour, right? It's an attorney, lawsuit. Now, the title company, right, to close, right, is similar to a normal transaction. Again, varies by state, varies by title company, but and you're paying for title insurance, right? So let's say anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000, right? That's separate than the quiet title, right? There's not one does not replace the other. Versus, I'll say, title certification, which is kind of that faster, shortened version of a quiet title. Right, that might be anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000, and it might be shorter. Now, what is a title certification? It means that particular underwriter says they'll issue title insurance, but that doesn't mean every underwriter will issue title insurance on that based on the title certification. That's a nuance that I think a lot of people don't understand.
Okay. All right. Well, I always like to just kind of see how can we help. We've already said we're not a title company. So is there any way Tax Sale Resources can help, an investor at least get started or figuring out where to go or what to do?
Yeah, title's a tricky thing, and you can certainly, order a title search, through the research platform. That's, a step in the right direction. We've got, contact information for the county recorder and, links to the county recorder. If you want to do it yourself, you can do it that way. But I'd say just simply talking to an attorney, right? And you're not sure to talk to, give us a call. We can at least point you in the right direction. If you have questions on exactly how quiet title works versus title certification, we can help a little bit, but again, it can point you to an attorney that really can describe it in more detail. But I guess it's just ask the question and just be aware that this exists, right? Talk to the attorney in that state. They can fill you in on all the things you need to know. And at the end of the day, you're not going to have a process that's perfect. Even if you hire an attorney to do a title search and analyze every title, right? At the end of the day, they're humans, right? And they're not perfect. There's going to be instances where maybe they missed it, or they're relying on a title abstractor and they missed it, right? And so there's no perfect solution, but doing something is better than doing nothing, for sure.
Isn't that the case with most things in life? Awesome. All right. Well, I think not good job on keeping it fairly focused, Bri. I do understand enough on titling to know that it is a complicated subject. So appreciate your little nuances and at least steps in the right direction. That's what we're here to try and help guide investors in the right direction. So hopefully this has given all of you out there a jumping off point, we'll call it. And as Brian said, and I'll say it again, seek out title companies, seek out title attorneys, do your due diligence again in this regard. So thanks, Brian, for coming back, and we'll be back, everybody. So remember, every second and fourth Wednesday we have podcasts that comes out, and always an associated interview and blog to go with it, which will expand on the topic. So keep checking back. We always try to put new content out there for you. So thanks, Brian.
Sounds great. I appreciate it. And good luck, everybody. Hopefully you learned something today.
Indeed. Happy investing, and good luck out there. Thanks.